You can also store your authentication profiles inside of a database instead of internal to Ignition. To take a look at that, we'll go into the Configure section of the Gateway web page here, and then under Security in Users Roles, we'll select that, and you can see that we have two user sources here, and we're going to create a third one because those are both the internal type. This does require that you have a database connection already set up, though we already have a couple in here. So I'm going to click on Create New User Source, and you can see we have several different options. The internal, bottom one, is the same as the default and the OPCUA module. The top three are Active Directory, which we'll talk about in a different video, and then the database one is the one that we're going to use now. So that stores all the information inside the database. So I'll click on the next button here. I'm going to call this one dbauth. And one of the important things to do with a database authentication profile is to set your failover source to be something that's not a database authentication profile. Now you can use any other authentication profile that you want, but it's recommended that you use an internal source because what the failover does is it will allow users to log in if you cannot log in with the database authentication profile. So if your database is crashed or the network connection to it has gone down, you don't want your users to not be able to log in at all. So I'm going to choose the default failover source. And you can see here that there's a failover mode that has two options here, hard and soft. Hard means if dbauth isn't available at all, then go and check default. Soft means if they typed in the wrong password and it didn't work, then go and check default. So if we scroll down here a little bit, you can see we have a couple of main properties. I'm going to choose the database called MySQL, and then I'm going to choose an automatic mode. And with the automatic mode, all we have is just this one setting here, a table name prefix. Now you can leave it blank if you want, but I like to use auth underscore. So that way all the tables in the database will be created for me automatically, but they'll all start with auth underscore in their name. If you're not using the automatic mode, if you're using a manual one, then you can see that there are several different options here for our manual mode. These are queries that you've got to fill in that will allow Ignition to go and find the information it needs from those particular tables. So I'm going to leave them all blank, but you can see that there are samples here of queries that you might need, but again, they're based on whatever tables you already have created. Right, so I'll set my database to MySQL and mode automatic, table name prefix to auth underscore, come down to the bottom, click create new user source, and now you can see we have a new dbauth source created. Now these tables won't actually be created yet in the database, not until they're needed at least. So what we can do is we can go over to the right hand side here to manage users. I'll click on that, and then you can see there are no users, and if we click over to roles, there are no roles. So what I can do is go add a new role, role 1, and click add role, and then I'm going to go to my users here, and I'm going to add a new user. I'm going to call this user 1, give it some password, and assign it to role 1. Now when I hit add user, then you can see we've got our user 1 in there. And now our tables will be created. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my designer here. But really what I want to do is I want to go into my database query browser inside the designer to go and look at the tables that were created for us. So when I open that guy up, you can see here we have several different tables that start with auth underscore. Right, so if I go to my auth underscore users, I'm just going to double click on it so that it fills in the query for me. Hit execute. Then you can see here we have some information, our username, a hashed password, and whatever other information we've added. Additionally, what I've got here is we have the user RL, which is a role mapping that goes to the roles table. So if I go look at my roles table and execute, you can see I have a role name of role 1, and both my user 1 and role 1 have an ID of 1. So if I go into the user RL table, then you can see here we have our mapping between user 1 and role 1. And you could potentially have as many different roles as you want. It'll work exactly the same as the internal authentication profile, just stored in the database. And this gives you a little bit more flexibility because you can change anything you want in the database so long as you don't remove any columns that are already in there. So I could go into this auth users table and add an additional column that was maybe the name of the project that they got into by default, or maybe their main screen of choice.